During the Columbia University riots, a cop throws law student Michael Ratner to the ground. Far from breaking his spirit, Michael rises, ready to change the world. Over the next 40 years, Michael would find a political home at CCR. Beginning with his mentorship by CCR founders, he would go on to have key roles in some of the most significant cases and radical causes of our time. His initiation at CCR takes him to Attica.
I walk in and within 4 days, maybe 5 days in September, I'm sent up to Attica prison to interview people who've been tortured after the Attica prison rebellion.
Militancy in the streets led Michael and the center to represent Vietnam War protesters, court-martialed soldiers, and radio station WBAI. Other key struggles during this decade included defending Vieques protesters opposing the bombing of the island, fighting for the liberation of Puerto Rico, and challenging illegal FBI spying and warrantless wiretapping. Ever one to stand up for people's liberation movements, Michael and the CCR represented the Young Lords, the Black Panthers, and the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. They opposed the Cuban embargo and represented the Venceremos Brigade. At home, the counterculture and revolution in the streets were suppressed, but dissident voices still needed protection. Abroad, and particularly in Central America, revolution was brewing, and as CCR's first legal director, Michael brought cases against U.S. intervention in Nicaragua, Grenada, El Salvador, Cuba, and Guatemala. Domestically, CCR continued to fight FBI surveillance and suppression of domestic dissent by representing CISPAS. Michael represented Winona LaDuke and the White Earth Band of the Chippewa Indians in an historic 5-year battle to regain their ancestral lands. Michael continued his work to end U.S. imperialism and uphold international human rights. Michael and CCR sued to stop illegal U.S. invasion of Iraq and fought against the human rights violations arising from Indonesia's occupation of East Timor. Michael worked tirelessly to prevent the repatriation of Haitian refugees who fled after the U.S.-supported coup that overthrew Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. After 3 years of litigation and activism, one of Michael's proudest moments was seeing the closure of the HIV camp in Guantanamo Bay, where hundreds of HIV-infected Haitians were unlawfully detained.
The big lesson we learned from Guantanamo was that the U.S. position, under both Bush 1 and Clinton, I should say, they did not change, was that Guantanamo was a law-free zone.
In the wake of the Bush administration's reactionary response to the attacks of 9/11, Michael and the center were at the forefront of the fight against the administration's efforts to dismantle the fundamental protections of the U.S. Constitution and international law. One of the most egregious examples was the establishment of the detention camp at Guantanamo. Michael and the CCR were quick to recognize the government's attempt to create a legal black hole.
Now it's been 2.5 years in Guantanamo. The people there have had no lawyers, no families, no charges, no trials. They don't even know that we at the Center for Constitutional Rights represent them.
When no other organizations were willing to represent prisoners there, CCR stood up to this flagrant violation of international and U.S. law. Continuing his lifelong opposition to U.S. wars and military interventions, Michael worked with the center to challenge Bush's war on terror on all fronts, including the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. Together, Michael and CCR fought against government policies and programs authorizing torture, extraordinary renditions, military trials, and illegal roundups and detentions of Muslim men.
And our office started getting calls, where's my husband, where's my brother, where's my father? And you would be lied to by the administration. And as it turns out, of course, those people were moved around to different prisons. They were treated as if they were terrorists, even though they were just non-citizen Muslims with no record of terrorism. None of them turned out to be terrorists. And a lot of them were beaten, harassed, and abused.
The war on terror had a direct effect in the U.S., with the widespread curtailment of the right to dissent and a shocking increase in government surveillance and spying, especially on Muslims. As they did decades before, Michael and CCR found themselves front and center in the fight for our fundamental rights. As the U.S. transitioned from Bush to President Barack Obama, Michael would amplify the call for prosecutions to hold Bush administration officials accountable for their grave human rights abuses, both in the U.S. and abroad.
To see these memos, to put it into that they were actually instrumentalized, this is not just theoretical. This is what was happening here for 8 years, essentially a dictatorship. And then to see the response of many of the Democrats here to saying, oh, well, let's just expose it and turn the page. I mean, what we're saying is that's the way it's going to happen again. Because unless you prosecute people, there's no deterrence for not doing this again.
This next decade will be marked by the struggle to restore and expand upon the rights lost in the past decade. But it is also a decade of excitement and hope as we see protests from Arab Spring to Madison and OWS, as well as WikiLeaks' assault on the secrecy that destroys democracy. Michael, as usual, is in the front lines.
WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, journalists who have revealed, millions at this point, certainly hundreds of thousands of documents implicating the United States in serious crimes.
The current struggle for transparency and accountability has led Michael and CCR to give their strong support to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks as providers of the information vitally necessary for a functional democracy. Following one of the darkest periods in U.S. history, radical people's movements have re-emerged, and as in decades before, Michael is there as a leading activist and voice for social justice.
I was up to the City Hall, completely peaceful.
Michael's unique voice and political analysis provide a much-needed antidote to commercial media. As an influential author, spokesperson, and radio personality, Michael's impact as a people's lawyer and advocate is widespread and reaches beyond U.S. borders, inspiring, informing, and motivating.
Narrow it through police violence. So when they arrest 700 people on the Brooklyn Bridge, when they arrest people at Citibank, as they did the other day, who were trying to move their money from the Citibank to credit unions, when they pepper spray women, as they did a week or two ago in New York, that's a way of suppressing dissent.
Over the years, Michael has only become more inspired to advocate on the side of the oppressed. Michael's radical vision for social change is needed now more than ever, as the Center for Constitutional Rights and the Bertha Foundation launched the Social Justice Institute. Just as Michael's mentors cultivated his radical vision, Michael will play a critical role in training the next generation of radical lawyers and activists.
When we impose tyranny abroad, we impose tyranny at home as well. The theory of universal jurisdiction is that there should never be a safe haven for a torturer, nowhere in the world.
No one should be at Guantanamo. Every human being has fundamental rights. Fundamental rights to charges, to a trial, to go to a court, and to get released. There's no exceptions. Absolutely none.